Welcome, everybody, to Before the Commit, episode 6. Man, I can't believe it's episode 6 already. This week we're going to talk about MCP, another acronym to layer into your vernacular. We'll explain what it is, what you could use it for. We've talked about it quite a bit, but not actually dug deep into it. We'll cover Insecure Sus. Does a programming language actually matter in the era of AI coding? And of course, we'll hit news or noise. We'll touch a little bit about what we were mentioning last week, some of the things going on at OpenAI regarding how young people might be using, LLMs as therapists. We'll also talk about an interesting application of AI in the medical world. With me, as usual, my friend Dustin Hillgartner. Dustin, how you doing?
Good. Maybe before the 10th episode, we'll finally have the name of our podcast down. Mental memory.
I got it. I got Before the Commit right. Yeah, actually,
you did get it right.
Me.
There was just a slight hesitation. You got it right, but it was a slight hesitation. Like your brain had to think, like, wait a second, what was it?
Yeah, it could be before the commit. It could be beyond the commit. Actually, somebody on Signal Group somewhere asked me, what does it mean? What does before the commit mean? And really, the concept of it came out of, in the world of AI coding, securing the code post-commit is not sufficient enough. And you need to be thinking about the models that you're using, the way that people might be interacting with them. And essentially, you're shifting even further left to securing, how somebody might, from the time of their thinking, be using a model in a manner which, might introduce a security issue, hence before the commit.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the MCP topic is something that is often before the commit as well. So maybe we could segue into that. I did some deep diving into it. I mean, as often happens, sometimes you've been using a technology for a long time before you actually dig into it and figure out exactly how it works at the granular level, because something becomes a trend or something becomes very popular and maybe you don't dig into it. But MCP is an open source framework that essentially, I mean, in a nutshell, it's kind of like it's a more reflective way of viewing APIs. So you can kind of think of like the traditional API model, like you have an API, and then if you're lucky, you have like Swagger documentation or something like that.
Why don't you explain APIs a little bit? Like just go a level deeper.
It's like an adapter that allows you to integrate with other applications that you yourself did not build, or perhaps you did build them, but it's a nice sort of standardized way of communicating across a boundary. So, it's
so like a steering wheel from a car might be an API to control how the car moves, like for somebody in like layman's terms.
Well, another way to look at it is like if you have, the web kind of evolved as pages that you'd look at. Eventually they became like applications, right? So you're taking actions in these applications, often driven through like visual UI, you're clicking around. But then there becomes this need for applications to actually manipulate other applications. So for instance, maybe you're in one application and you want to share that post on Facebook. So how would you have your application interact with another application? It's obviously not going to open the browser, log in, click around, and do everything like that. It needs a more efficient way of authenticating as you and taking the action on your behalf. And what that is this kind of little concept called APIs, application programming interfaces. And it's essentially a way to skip past all the UI that the user needs and get right at the action that needs to be taken in a secure fashion, an efficient fashion as well. But all those integrations are built beforehand by an engineering team who thought about that integration. So what they're doing is they're reading about the Facebook API because they want to introduce the sharing concept or some sort of other interaction with Facebook into their application. And they're going through, let's say, the Swagger documentation or whatever other documentation Facebook has. And they're making choices to add that integration into their application. Now, obviously, that's too much upfront work for an LLM who needs to be making these choices it needs to be doing all this research and understanding what the API does so it could use it on the fly. Otherwise, your LLM applications would have to go integrate with each API, each vendor, one by one, adding each one. So, so MCP is kind of like a more reflective standard. Instead of having to read the documentation to understand what capabilities are available to you, MCP is more structured in a way that allows you to self-discover the capabilities. And it's broken down into basically 4 pieces, 4 distinct like primitives. One of them is resources. So resources are kind of like if you wanted to expose any type of like kind of read access data. So for instance, like database queries or file systems or any sort of like, you could think of almost like a RESTful interface to some sort of resources. It could be like an API. It could be a number of things, but it's a very basic kind of like URL, a URL type schema. You're making a request on something that looks very path-like. And it has like filters and, ways of limiting the fields and other types of database query type stuff to it. But it's essentially like how you would get at things. So to bring it to how this might work, like when you're using Claude Code or when you're using Cursor and you'll see it's reading certain files as it learns about your code base. That's probably an MCP resource behind the scenes. Your code base inside of your IDE is a resource for the IDE to use via MCP. And that's how it's, sort of learning about what files you have on the fly. So that's kind of a way of getting at information. You could imagine that one use case might be that, let's say you have an old school CRM. It's like a SQLite database or something like that. You could expose that as a resource in an MCP server internally in your company's LLM. And now everybody has the ability to ask about clients and things like that to the LLM and get that information out efficiently.
So how would you, so on that, maybe you cover this later, but since you just brought that up, like how does authorization and authentication work? For example, like you brought up the database like concept, like how do I prevent somebody from dropping all rows in a table versus saying querying specific records in a specific table based off of my, what would be in a traditional like role-based access control?
Well, in the case of resources, it's only data retrieval. So you're not going to be making, and that's what's nice about resources as well, is it kind of locks it into that kind of like read only. Now I know there's someone out there who's saying, well, I could make a call, I could make a change on a GET request. Of course you could probably fool the system into making changes with a badly designed MCP server. But if you're following strict guidelines, resources are going to be you're going to be making data retrieval, fetching of files, fetching of database records, things like that. So that's one way it kind of secures you. That if you're going into resources, you're retrieving data. You're not executing some change on the system behind the scenes. As far as authentication, I mean, it really ends up being similar to how like any other API would be. So for instance, if it's a system that has, a token-based authentication, like a secret key or something like that, that would be part of your MCP definition in your host application. You would put that key in there. So it really, I don't think the authentication mechanisms are locked in some way. It's really kind of up to the server to decide, and they're probably riding on top of their current authentications. But I don't think it's choosy about how you do that. Meaning MCP the open standard itself. The next thing on the list is prompts. So MCP servers can expose prompts to the host application, the client. Um, Prompts are just what it sounds like. They're basically a bunch of templated prompts. And you might say, well, what's the use of that? You can think of it as like guided interaction. So you can imagine that not only do you get this nice little Facebook MCP that gives you the ability to go see your timeline and what your friends did via resources where you could retrieve information, but now you can also leverage Facebook developed prompts that help you do a guided interaction. So, for instance, how to maybe get your timeline back in the way that you expect it would be a prompt that asks for the data and puts and returns it in a specific format. Instead of you having to write that prompt yourself, you can just leverage the one that Facebook did. Now, I'm just making this up out of thin air. I'm not sure if there's even an MCP server. Well, I'm sure there probably is, but I'm not familiar with it for Facebook. But so that's one way you would use prompts. Is it's kind of like the owner of the MCP server giving you a bunch of like templated ways you can use it, and these could be quite sophisticated. It could be asking for tool calls in between. There's quite a wide use case for what you could use that for. The next thing on the list is tools. Now, tools is interesting because the whole world of agentic, when people talk about agentic, and I know there's other open standards out there than MCP. There's, MCP was invented by Anthropic. Some of the competitors of Anthropic have tried to do their own open standard around this concept, but MCP has really been the one that's caught on the most. So I'm not just talking about MCP. Obviously, there's other standards out there. But this concept of tools, which is, to get back to your other question about, authenticating and when you're taking action, this is really where you're going to want to authenticate even more, because this is where actions can take place. This is where the whole agentic word comes from, agents, etc. Before tools, LLMs were just chatbots that could talk to you about things that it was trained on in the past. With resources, with tools, now it can take action on things. So it could go and make that Facebook post for you. It could use resources to find posts. You can then look at those posts and say, hey, I want to respond. And it uses the tool to go make essentially the API call behind the scenes to Facebook and make that action inside of Facebook. So tools could be, API calls, a whole variety of things. It's really up to the server to fulfill that interface with what they want their tools to be. Also, all along all of these things, they're reflective in a sense that every tool actually has like an LLM ready documentation for it. It tells it when to use the tool, why you would use the tool, what type of inputs are required in order for you to even call the tool, and what type of structured response you should expect from the tool. So all of these things, including the resources, are documented for the LLM. So when it is given this MCP server, it's kind of like giving it all these new primitives in the Facebook world, in this case, that it can go play with. It can go play with the timeline as a resource. It can go make actions inside of Facebook with the tools. It can maybe get some structured prompts from Facebook about how to even leverage these resources and tools even better. And everything I mentioned so far is what probably most people are familiar with MCP and its capabilities. But the next thing I'll mention is something that is in the MCP standard, but is not as widely leveraged or as widely understood. It's this concept called sampling. And sampling is the idea. So you can think of the client. The client has a host application, an AI application of some sort. You could imagine like Claude Desktop or ChatGPT's website or your Claude Code IDE. That's the host application. It has the MCP client in it. So you said, okay, I want you to communicate with Facebook, right? So it has the MCP client. The MCP server is over a slim piece of code that's basically acting as an adapter to the actions and resources behind the scenes at Facebook. So your client in the host application, let's say like Claude Code, is then reaching out to the server and making resource requests, etc., as part of a chain of thought, uh, uh, as part of the chain of thought and actions that your LLM is taking inside of your application. So this is what gets you the ability to like do pull requests and inside your ID automatically with the LLM. It's what allows you to even do some of the local actions inside of there. Now, sampling is this idea that the server can ask the client to prompt its LLM for something and get a response. So you can imagine the way this is described in very simple terms is that, it's a way of distributing the load of LLM resources is one way they talk about it, which is kind of like a non, sexy way of talking about it. There's actually a far better way that I've found, but it essentially allows the server to say, hey, go ask your LLM this. Now the server might not have an LLM, right? The server is just some application that's acting as a middleman between an API or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have an LLM. So you could imagine that you say to your AI application, hey, I'm looking for customers in this format, and I want it only to be in this type of way. I want it to be displayed in this type of way. Build me a report, right? Build me a cool report of all our customers who did this in the last year. Well, when you reach out to your MCP for the database, right, it's going to respond with like the results of a database query, right? Because it doesn't have an LLM. It doesn't know how to make that into a nice natural language report. But if that MCP server implements sampling, and you've turned it on your side in the client, and there's a whole bunch of security protections around this, the client can control everything about it. The server can actually say, hey, here are the results of my query, but can you generate this report, right? And it will use the client's LLM to generate the report, right?
Is this similar to something we were discussing around handing off parts of a request to a different LLM? Say that might be more sycophantic.
Yeah, it's similar to that. Also, another way to look at it is like the client's LLM has the RAG and maybe all their stuff. So it's kind of a cool way of having an outside vendor be able to generate a report with your confidential data in a way that's controlled, like where you can tell what's coming in and what's coming out from the client side. And you can also have human in the loop before it runs and things like that. There's all kinds of cool stuff you could do. But that's the way it's described, is like a way of not every server having to have an LLM. It saves every server from having to have an LLM. They can leverage the client's LLM to generate the nice report with the data they're passing back, all that kind of stuff. That's how it's described. But when I was digging into it, what I uncovered was like, imagine the client and the server are both LLMs. This allows for a more powerful API, right? So APIs are very atomic, right? Like if I want to go buy tickets on SeatGeek,
for the most part, yeah.
For the most part, right?
Let's have callbacks.
If I want to go, what I mean by atomic is typically you're traveling through a chain of events to get to the results you want, and they're very controlled and structured. So if I want to get a seat at a stadium at SeatGeek, right, and I want to use the API to do that, I'm going to go like, there's probably a get events, right, to go find the event, and then there's get seats to go find the available seats, and then there's probably like purchase seat where I could use the ID from the seat in a purchase command, right? Imagine your LLM, imagine the future where your personal assistant LLM that has all your details, and then there's the salesperson LLM at the event, right? And your LLM, you told your LLM, hey, I want to buy tickets, right?
It really becomes more conversational. Is like we're really kind of creating this like
the
simulation of humans.
The nuance can happen. What you might look at when you tell your LLM to go buy tickets is that it establishes a sampling connection with the LLM salesperson. And it says, hey, what available tickets do you have? It tells them what available tickets. Hey, I like the aisles. Do you have any aisles? Is that one in the shade? Is that one like there's all these things that can happen that would never happen through an API because you have no ability to ask that question.
Well, also too, it's like to the personal assistant use case. Like, let's say that my ability to launch a conversation with an LLM is based off of my cognitive process dedicating cycles to say, I want to do X, Y, or Z. But instead, if an LLM has access, like for example, like I have a Gemini AI premium account under my personal Google One, and you can link it to your email, to your calendar, to your task list. And you could say, you could give it instructions to say, hey, I would like to plan activities for the rest of the week, and just give that as an ongoing prompt to your personal assistant. Similar to this like dating app that we had talked about many years ago, where it would look at your empty calendar and then book something on OpenTable. But it can essentially go out and think for itself. Oh, I'm your personal assistant. You have now given it a brain. It can then go execute a scheduled task to daily look at your schedule or weekly look at your schedule, because you can do these background tasks. And then it goes and starts talking to an LLM, and it says, okay, well, I found these dates. And there, you kind of create a conversation, if you will, between your personal assistant and say several MCP servers that are kind of having a two-way discussion, because that's really what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it's like ordering on Uber Eats, right? Minus the comment section, which I wonder if they even read. But ordering on Uber Eats is kind of like the API version of ordering food. It's like you get to click +1 on that meal and you're going to get it. And maybe if you write a comment that says take the pickles off, they might do that or not read it. I'm not sure. But that's the API version. It's kind of like a structured pathway to get a structured response. This sampling concept can allow a conversation, like you're sitting down at a dinner and you can say, how's the chef cooking it tonight? Hey, do you think he could swap this in and out? Your LLM could negotiate on your behalf with a salesperson LLM and maybe get a thread the needle on what you need done in a way that's not advertised publicly. You understand what I'm saying? It allows brands to be much more flexible with each client to get exactly what their needs are. Whereas before you would have had to staff a whole, seasoned veteran sales team to be able to have that much customization in service.
Yeah, this one use case. I started listening to this new podcast. One of our listeners suggested to listen to their podcast called the AI Builders Club. And they actually talk about how to, in this one use case, they talked about how to solve customer chaos with smarter routing. It was episode 7. So they basically use intercom to that comes into their Slack. But sometimes a more complicated problem comes up that requires them to go and query another system to get the results back. And this use case that I just kind of discovered is, imagine a customer interacting with an AI-powered chatbot for a complex issue. The chatbot, acting as the MCP server, might have enough information or the right capabilities to solve the customer's problem. So the chatbot sends a sampling request to a human that would contain the entire conversation with the customer. The human agent in the loop, sees the conversation and then uses their knowledge, or perhaps another LLM, for better tools. And then the chatbot can learn from that response, so that in the future, when the similar issue occurs, you've now increased the knowledge of the MCP server or whatever the underlying system is. So that to me was really cool, how you can't assume that a right answer or the knowledge is always going to be there, right? You could say like, okay, well, there might be some additional it's just yeah, this is pretty amazing. I didn't realize this existed.
Yeah, it's, I really had to do some deep diving into it to kind of fuss out some of the use cases. And a lot of the use cases that are publicly advertised are like, distributing your load on the LLM, like you don't have to have an LLM everywhere now, and all and like, yeah, you have
Use
a
cases.
RAGs, you have company data, so now you can generate a port with your company data without exposing your company data to the vendor. But when I thought about it, I was like, this allows LLMs to talk to LLMs, agentic LLMs, your personal assistant talking to an agentic LLM, the company's representative, and both of them can have a conversation and take actions on their
Yeah,
representatives, who they're representing. It's quite incredible. And it
yeah,
allows for you to break out of the API mode, which is kind of like, when you talk to the frontline support person, and they only have 4 buttons they can push on their computer. They can't give you a special deal. You know,
yeah.
um, this is like, you could have your LLMs could be negotiating on your behalf.
So
It's pretty.
did you actually play around with any of the specific MCP servers?
I have. And what's interesting is that you have MCP servers, but then also you have CLI tools that your agentic coding agent can
Hmm.
use.
Hmm.
So sometimes you end up not getting the MCP server because your coding agent just finds the CLI on your machine, and you could tell it to use it. So for
And
instance,
by
I
the
don't
way, we
use.
could do a whole episode on just this topic,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
MCP versus Bash tools.
Yeah, and honestly, to tell you the truth, probably the bash tools needs to be closed up over time. The way they're doing it with kind of like regex filtering on allow and everything like that is cool for now. But like,
Hmm.
I'd imagine that this evolves into more of a MCP or whatever open standard has become the popular one at that time. Remember, it's so early that I'm sure MCP got a lot of things wrong because they're like
Yeah.
V1. Um, so who knows how it
Open
evolves.
standard though. It's not like Anthropic came up with it, but it's not a closed standard. I'm sure they have some
Yeah,
power
it'll
there
evolve.
in terms
It'll
of
evolve.
yeah, yeah.
You know. Um, but I was blown away when I saw the sampling thing, because I was like, wow, that is a glimpse into maybe what the future looks like. So that was pretty interesting. I didn't expect to see that. I knew about the tools,
Yeah.
resources, and prompts.
I'm curious if like Tesla has an MCP server, what kind of cool shit you could do with it with sampling.
I don't know. I mean, I don't. I mean, I'm not even sure of all the use cases, honestly. But it sound like a lot of things that would have to come into place for that to be leveraged in the way that I was saying. Like, companies would have to get to the point where they have an LLM representative, an agentic representative, right? Like, um, but it's funny. You can imagine like a lot of pages like Expedia.com just being a chat bot, right? Like, what do you need all the rest of it for?
Yeah,
Um, and then your chatbot talks to that chatbot through sampling, and you get the absolute perfect, or I should say the best available flight you can get.
yeah. There is an
Never
MCP
perfect
server.
nowadays.
There are MCP servers for travel assistance,
Hmm.
so help you find
Yeah,
itineraries and things like that. So you can imagine you can do a lot of this stuff already.
yeah.
Um,
So you
yeah,
want to talk
this I
about Grok Code real quick?
well, yeah. I'm just what were the specific MCP servers that you played around with?
Oh, yes. Um, I've played around with, I think Playwright has an MCP server that I played around with a little while, because I'm very interested in the idea. So I get the idea of writing like tests to lock in sort of back end work that you've done via AI coding tools. Also, you can use kind of like investigating like TDD concepts, writing the test first, having the LLM fill the tests, etc. Um, that all works great for back end type stuff. But once you get to the front end where you have visual aspects of the application, it's very hard to write acceptance tests for what visually the visual done looks like. You understand what I'm saying? There's only limited multimodal concept capabilities with the LLMs nowadays, so they can see screenshots, but you need to get the screenshot to it. So there's MCP tools like Playwright, etc., that can get you like the console errors from your browser into kicking off headless browsers to see what's going on, taking screenshots of pages. Playwright, Puppeteer. There's a few other smaller ones that do similar concepts. Then I've also, the other one I found that I always use is Context 7. Context 7 is a very simple concept. It's every single engineering library you can think of. Their documentation is distilled down to like Markdown, like in very, very concise Markdown. So it's like it's built. It takes all the documentation from the web for all these libraries and tools and consolidates it down to a perfect little small context for an LLM. And then you hand Context 7 MCP to your LLM and tell it, hey, anytime you're using a technology, go and grab the docs from Context 7. And you're guaranteed to get the latest docs. Because one of the early problems you had with AI coding is that it would code with a composite of all the versions of documentation it saw on the web. So you'd sometimes find it using old versions of Router for React or something like that. And you wouldn't realize it until you were a little bit deeper, and then you'd encounter a problem and it would be like, oh yeah, we should use the new router. It's like, well, why didn't you use the new router from the beginning? So Context 7 will solve those problems for you if you leverage it properly. You don't have to worry about old versions or going and looking for documentation.
Yeah, I've used that, and I've played around with the Kubernetes MCP server, which, yeah, of course, you could always fall back to the CLI, but I think one of the issues is that, you then need to ensure that all these tools are available on whatever build servers you might be using to test your deployment. And yeah, like you might just only be using it for debugging locally, but when you start considering things like ACLs or like how you can, getting the right regex in place that prevents you from running specific commands, like for example, running a kubectl get versus a delete. Yeah, it could get kind of crazy, like having to hand jam or telling your LLM to rewrite my settings.json file if you're using Claude Code.
Yeah.
So yeah, you did mention before the podcast you wanted to talk about Grok Code.
Yeah. So this was an unexpected. This popped up on my timeline, and so I've been saying for a while that I use Claude Code they call it, with the Claude model to do pretty much all the coding that I do nowadays. With AI coding tools, I use Claude Code. When I'm using an AI coding tool, I use Claude Code entirely at this point. However, I do use it inside a cursor, and the reason why I use it inside a cursor is because occasionally I ask a question to Grok 4, which I find to be, in my opinion, the least sycophant and the most intelligent of all the models. However, it's absolutely horrible at leveraging tools in a way that makes it useful for coding, right? Now, I know there's a lot of people on the web who are copying and pasting from Grok 4 and having great success, but to me, I'm just past the copy and paste thing, and I need it to be in a tool that's going to allow me to have the productivity that I'm used to at this point, which is just out of this world. But I've been watching Grok 4 and waiting for them to finally like figure out the whole tool calling problem and make it useful for coding in an IDE. Well, they just released Grok Code. It's actually, the full name is Grok-Code-Fast-1, but they're calling it Grok Code on X and the internet, which is kind of a little bit of a misnomer because it's not an IDE like Claude Code is. It's just a model. So it's more akin to like Claude Sonnet 4. But oh my God, is it A, smart, and B, fast? The fact that they call it Grok code and leave the fast part out is probably the biggest surprise, because it is incredibly fast. And then it's so fast that you forget that it's a thinking model. It's not like one of these, old school non-chain of thought models like 4.0 from Grok, from ChatGPT or from OpenAI. It's actually doing a chain of thought, right? So, which is crazy because it's so fast, and it also makes you think that maybe it's a dumb model because it's so fast. But
so
it
are you
is
back to your cursor?
Yeah, I'm back to you. Which kind of is like bittersweet, because I like Claude Code, right? But now I'm back using Cursor again because of this Grok code. And by the way, until September 10th, it's free. So inside of Cursor, you can use Grok code fast for free right now, until September 10th, I believe. And it's quite amazing. Check it out and tell me it's not super fast and super smart. Now that I'm back in Cursor, I'm starting to realize some of the improvements Cursor has made. So one thing I noticed is that Cursor leverages background terminals much better now. So now I see Cursor doing things like npm run dev to bring up my website in a background terminal, and then using the foreground terminal to go curl it to see if certain aspects of it are working. So that's nice to see, because it used to be that if it ever ran a terminal command that ended up with a user interaction at the end, like you have to do Control-C to stop it from like a website coming up, like you just basically stalled your AI coding agent. It's stuck there, right? But now it's not stuck there anymore. It's smarter about how it does that. It also allows you, like if you get to a bash command that asks you to say yes, or has some sort of user interaction where you got to type something in or choose something from a list, you can actually do that in the little mini terminal now. So I'm not sure when they added that. It was sometime after I started using Claude Code, but I came back to Cursor and they have that. So that's great. So I would definitely recommend that everybody check out Grok Code Fast, because it's free,
Nice.
and it's fast and it's smart.
Nice. And I just uninstalled Cursor from my system. Was using Claude Code with VS Code, but it's okay. Is there a way to use?
Yeah, you can use it with Copilot. You can use it with Copilot.
Can you switch the model out? You can use Grok with Claude Code?
No.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the only thing that works with Claude Code is Claude, which is a weird flip side to being vertically integrated, right? Usually vertically integrated is a huge plus. And I think it is for Anthropic. But the downside is now that there's a model that may be better than Claude in coding. It's early, but I'll tell you, it's very good. If it is better than Claude, then it's interesting because Claude Code can't use it. So,
yeah. So yeah, let's jump into Secure Sus. And I came up with this segment through my usual perusing of the debates on the internet. I mean, it's just like the far extremes of, AI coding, vibe coding, like, there's like the far one side, which is like, this is like a fad. You can't replace people, like not seeing it as a tool or like an accelerant or an augmenter or like a way to learn. But like, real engineering will never be replaced. I mean, I had somebody comment on one of the YouTube reels that said, like, if you were a real coder, you wouldn't be using AI. And it's because you're not a good coder that's why you use AI now. If you were really good, you wouldn't use it. And then the other side of it is like the far extreme, the danger side of it, which is like we're replacing all of our engineers. All of our coding is done with AI. It's, we've unlocked full autonomy. And the truth is that uh, you can never get rid of engineers because engineers are fundamentally the people that need to. Now, maybe there'll be less of them for sure, or maybe there'll be a specific skill set that's required in order to be an engineer and the ability to harness these tools and know how they work. Like, for example, the sampling thing, like knowing how to harness that correctly takes an engineer.
Yeah.
Now, some of these tools will start configuring themselves if you set them up correctly. Like even setting up new MCP servers that are automatically provisioned using infrastructure as code, and you can build autonomous like learning environments. And I definitely see that as being, something that you could even do today if you wanted to. But there'll always be some level of engineering. We'll get just further. I mean, and that's kind of like where I'm going with this topic
Mm-hmm.
is source code necessary? Is it something that we even care about? Because writing software, I started writing software in the late 80s using GW Basic, which was
Mm-hmm.
the version of Basic that was distributed on MS-DOS. And then later on, became VB, would write Windows applications, and ASP, back in the late 90s. But, for the large part of our life, mine and yours lives, we have told computers what to do through writing in a language that can be interpreted by a program that compiled it down all to the same thing, which is machine code. So the question is like, do we even need this intermediate language? In fact, .NET would compile down into an intermediate language, which would then, get passed to the virtual machine, similar to how Java works, which makes it like a fully portable language.
Mm-hmm.
But like, does the concept of reading code actually matter? Maybe this is not a secure sus thing. I don't want to be opinionated, but like, why do I even care about code anymore? Like, what difference does it make?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, in the extreme long term, I could see uh code going away and and generating straight to binary. But I believe that there would be a whole bunch of tools or evolutions that have happened since then, in that time period to make that something that's more auditable. There's a bunch of things that aren't technical that make code important. But the one
Okay.
technical thing is that when you want to fix something very specific that's going wrong, you need to be able to identify that thing, right? And if you and when you identify that thing that you want fixed, you have to be able to articulate it and communicate it in such a way to the AI so that it understands what's going wrong and what's being fixed. In in the current time period, the only real way to describe what's wrong accurately and concisely is to refer to code. Um, Otherwise, you could say, well, I could go to my website, I could just tell it that doesn't look right. But if you're just talking about a static website like your homepage, okay, maybe there's a little bit you could do without having to have knowledge of code. But when you're talking about incredibly sophisticated systems like the back end of Uber or something like that, you really need to understand how it's all working on a line by line basis. At least
Is
at
that
this
like,
point.
is that the concept of a human being able to still interact with the model, to be able to describe back to it what the issue may or may not be? It's our way of communicating to the model because
It's
we
our way
speak
of
in terms of the code.
Yeah, it's our way of concisely speaking about something, right? Relating to logic and code, right? Now, maybe that simplifies, maybe that evolves over time to be less and less technical, or less and less, whatever, granular. But at this point, like if there's a very targeted bug that you need to fix, like
Mhm.
you could find that in code. If it wasn't there, it might be hard to find, right? It might be hard to even know that it exists in there. And then you get to the non-technical side, which is like, how do you pass regulatory or compliance, or like, how do you trust it, right? Um, Code gives you a level of trust because you understand every line of what it's going to do if you read the code. And by the way, this is why I think that engineers aren't going away anytime soon. Like back to your topic before about like whether engineers are going to be replaced. I think that uh, everything's relative, right? Like AI is going to replace people the same way that chainsaws replace people, you know? Uh, I see these huge monstrosity machines that pick up the whole tree and like slide it through a tube and slice off all the branches and then slice it in
Mhm,
half. It's
mhm.
manipulating it like it's a little toy in the air. And you know that all the people driving those machines have probably a background as lumberjacks, etc. They were probably doing it with chainsaws or doing it by hand at some point in the past. And I'm sure there's somebody out there who's saying, "Oh, but those machines, they gouge the wood one out of 100 times, and if you did it with an axe, it would be so much better." But like the technology is just too great and the productivity is just too great that you need to be leveraging that machine to get the economies of scale that you want. I think AI is the same way. And instead of writing the code by hand, you're going to be driving the tree cutting machine of coding.
Yeah, I
And I
guess one of the points I would kind of counter with this is like if I can tell a coding agent to just write my application in assembly, I don't
Mhm.
need third-party libraries, so supply chain risk goes away. Um, I don't need to understand what happened because as an end user, I'm only concerned with, say, for example, delivering an application to a customer that the functional specification of what I've asked for is completed. That is not necessarily, again, we're dropping back down into code to test something, code paths, code. But if those concepts don't exist and you're purely doing security testing or user acceptance testing through other mechanisms, right? You're not doing it at a code level, right? You're doing it through Playwright or you're doing it through some fuzzing tool like Burp Suite or OpenZap. Why does it matter to why does code matter? Like, yeah, I'm describing it, but if I can describe to the system, this is the functional flaws here,
Mhm.
just fix the machine code till the tests pass.
Yeah. I think that in a niche situation, like if you're talking about like perhaps like a low level driver or some sort of thing that's really just acting in a way that is easily testable, then yeah, I believe that that's probably the best way to do it right now because you could then get your binary to be so efficient, right? Because you would just have the AI spin on the
But
binary.
why is it only a small application? Why not a more sophisticated one?
Well, I'm not talking about like the end all on history. I'm just saying
Mhm.
that I don't think that the AI has a
Capable.
context, is smart enough, has a context long enough, is,
Mhm.
it, 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 there's a whole bunch of variables that make it not capable of doing that in a way where you wouldn't eventually have to go look through that assembly and debug it yourself to some degree. Or, you know, like I've seen things on the web where people are like, "Oh, the database will drop your table," you know, those types of things. You need the line by line auditability at this point because you need an engineer to really make sure that the LLM is not hallucinating in some way. It's not
We need
creating some sort of
metrics
huge.
on how many times humans drop databases to compare that to. I bet you there's more humans that have accidentally dropped databases than there are AIs that have.
Yeah, probably at this point, yeah. But maybe over the course of the next year, the LLMs are going to catch up. you know, uh, I it, so I guess my point is that it's not yet to the point where I could generate a binary and not know that there's a bunch of things in there that I should have looked at, right? Like I'm probably one of the early adopters of all this stuff and use it many hours every single day. And I will tell you right now that you are not going to generate an application with no flaws. You have to be smart enough to find the flaws and It's very easy to fix the flaws because you just tell it to fix the flaw. But if you don't know how to identify the flaw in the first place, then you're never going to build anything with AI coding tools at this point in time that's super sophisticated. And if you do, you know, people are taking a real risk using your application, because how do you know it's secure? How do you know that you're not leaking user data or doing some sort of harmful act? Because you don't even know what's inside of it. Now, do I think when we have, artificial super intelligence that we're going to be still generating code, and it's not going to be like, listen, buddy, I'm smarter than all of you combined, and I'm making a binary, and you're just going to like it? Then yeah, it's going to do that, right? But right now, it's not a super intelligence. Right now, it's like, Albert Einstein with amnesia,
Yep.
from the movie Half Baked or something. It's lazy.
So let's jump into the last segment. We have only a few minutes left. I just wanted to touch quickly on the what we talked about last week regarding this, how OpenAI is improving their security safety measures as it relates to how they're realizing people are using, particularly teens. And requiring trusted contacts was one of them, strengthening protections for teens. And then there's this thing where Anthropic and OpenAI are actually working together for a joint evaluation of each other's models, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I found this article. It was in the India Times, and it's about a survey. It's an annual survey of U.S. adults who use AI in their jobs to understand the reality of AI adoption. Nearly half of the workers surveyed admitted to hiding their use of AI on the job in order to avoid judgment. This discomfort is particularly pronounced at the top, with 53% of C-suite leaders confessing they conceal their AI habits. I mean, I have so many feelings about this and thoughts about the ramifications of the culture behind this, of your organization not promoting the use of AI, and that what's your take on that?
I think the market is in a state of shock, right? Because this incredible technology has landed on its lap, and it doesn't quite understand, when, where, how, is it safe, so it's in a state of just absolute inaction. And then what happens is that the technology is so great that anybody who uses it can get ahead. So of course everyone's using it, right? But then there's this weird, I guess, shame that some people feel, or they feel maybe they might get in trouble. So they keep their mouth shut. And also, it's self-promotion. They can act like, oh, all these productivity gains is because I've been waking up early and exercising and, taking my vitamins, as opposed to leveraging a tool that gives them great productivity. I think they're trying to, get ahead and use the best tools, but their organizations are not giving them guidance about when and where they can use it. Or the organizations are just saying, no, you can't use it. Right.
We're now entering. Yeah, go ahead.
Which I think is fine in a period of shock to say, hey, let's take a step back. Let's evaluate this. But there's a period of time that eventually, if your organization is still saying you cannot use this, you're going to find that employees may end up leaving your company because they feel like they don't have the same, they're falling behind in their career.
Or they'll find other ways to use it without consent, right?
Yeah, which is what's more likely.
Which is like we're entering like the biggest kind of error of shadow IT, something I call shadow AI, that we've ever seen, because the reality is that people are using these tools. Like, even if it's one or two people, they could be using it in a manner which, you know, may not be aligned with. So it's not even a question of should we use the tools or not. It's like, no, you need to use them, and you need to pick the tools and create the right guardrails so that your employees understand how to use it. You know, the article goes on, it's like companies are not educating enough about this whole thing. The survey also points to an AI classified where access to training and guidance increases with rank. Only 3.7% of entry-level employees receive substantial training compared to 17% of C-suite. This leaves most frequent users, junior and younger staff, to navigate the new technology on their own. I mean, forget about the knowledge gap, the security gap like this poses. 80% of employees believe AI has boosted their productivity. A significant number are struggling. And, you know, Gen Z says are affected by the paradox, you know. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I didn't even realize, like, in my head, I was able to like say, yeah, this is a problem, but like we're like way ahead of the curve, and like thinking about how organizations all over the world did, you know, all kinds of data is flowing in and out of these things. And
no, I 100% agree. I mean, companies, when the shock took place, companies had one of three reactions. They either try to get ahead of it and somehow be like, hey, we're an AI company, we're doing this, or they you know, became very research oriented, where they're reaching out saying, hey, how can we use this? Is there anyone out there who's an expert that can, you know, they're perhaps hiring experts to come in and do experimentation internally to figure out how they can do this safely, and how they can leverage it for their employees. How can their employees leverage an LLM without leaking information, and things like that. And then there's a third category of companies who are pretending like nothing happened at all. They're pretending that AI never came out at all. And that's not going to end well.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into the next episode. I think there's some great tools out there to kind of guard your organization against how you might misuse an LLM. And one of the tools I played around with this weekend was Light LLM. I think it might be worth taking a look at that. I don't know if you want to do that. I know some of our friends have been using Warp, which is another coding agent, IDE type thing. I'll leave it to you to decide what you'll talk about. We didn't get to talk about the AI stethoscope that can detect 3 heart conditions in 15 seconds. I was actually sitting next to a doctor on a flight back, and we were talking about this. So yeah, it's this has been great.
Next
Looking
episode.
forward to next week. Thanks everybody for joining.